I'm going to give you a silly story that'll probably tell you a little bit about what I've spent dumb money on. And it wasn't long after I moved up here, and there was a particular handgun made by Sig Sauer that I always liked. And I just was at the gun range, and they had this unbelievable deal. This gun that'd normally be $900 some was on sale for $650. It was carried by a police officer for years. They send it back to the manufacturer, and they replace any parts that could have even possibly seen wear. They just replace them anyway because police officers don't practice enough, so they don't put enough wear and tear on their weapons. And the whole time I'm thinking, gosh, I should pull the trigger on this. I mean, I'm going to save $300, the difference between $950 and then what? But so first thing I did is I said, I will not pull the trigger now. I'm going to wait 1 week, which meant it could have sold. And just while I processed for that week, what showed up for me was I was playing the game of saving the 300. That's the difference between the 950 previous price and 650 now. But the real game was to save the 650. Was to save the money by not making the purchase at all, which no one celebrates. But it's really the big win. So that's one philosophical one. Not buying Starbucks probably isn't going to retire anybody. There's that book, The Latte Factor, but it's just not enough. Like, we all need to get to the point where we're setting aside 20% of our gross income. I'm going to say that twice. 20% of our gross income. You've heard people say, save 10%. I don't know where that came from. If it was sort of like, well, I tithe 10% to church, and I guess I'll tithe 10% of my retirement. It used to work back when we all had pensions. Now we don't. Because we don't, it's 20%. I can walk people through that math all day long. It doesn't matter when you start. The minimum always kind of ends up at 20. Sometimes it's higher later. So you have to set aside a sufficient amount of money because we owe the future us. Right now, we're all walking around with the net present value of a future retirement debt that we owe the older version of us. And let's just say it's age 65, older version of us. Well, one day I'm going to meet the older version of me. I'm going to shake their hand, and I will either have the millions of dollars that I owe them so that they can live the rest of their life with independence, or I don't. And if you've ever had anybody owe money to you, or you've owed money to somebody and you couldn't pay it, it's deeply embarrassing. It's hard to live with. It's hard to be in a relationship, except the problem is that'll be me, and I got to live with me for the rest of my life. So that's a second philosophical, like psychological way to work on yourself. So do that math. How much income do you want in your old age? Divide that number by 0.04. That's how much capital it's going to take, because you can take out about 4% a year. So you figure out how much your net present value is, and just the same way that you were so diligent about paying down your debt, now you've got a debt, but it's to a creditor that you actually like, that you owe the money to. So that's the last of the philosophical. For the quick stuff, waiting to do it. Second, have that ambition, the aims for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years out there and ahead of you. And oftentimes you'll find it's like, oh gosh, I'd really like to have that thing. It actually doesn't play into any of my aims. It's just going to feel good to, have it in my closet or have it in my gun rack or whatever people's different thing, in my garage. Some people it's cars. And if you just build the discipline of saying no sometimes, because that's where the stopping Starbucks gets valuable, where it's always easy to go by Starbucks and then you go, you know what, I'm just going to get coffee at the office today. It's not important that you save the money on the Starbucks. What's important is you built a little muscle a little bigger. And the little muscle that got a little bigger was your discernment and ability to allay that instant gratification that really isn't a problem. You can afford it, as we talked about earlier, but it does break strategy. So if the muscle built at avoiding the Starbucks is the same muscle that keeps us from spending $10,000 more on a car than we should, or the same muscle that says, I can just go ahead and whip up something. I don't need to spend $50 on DoorDash times, 3 times a week, which gets pretty pricey. So just by building the muscle, say no to little things that are habitually easy to do, actually build a muscle for you to naturally be able to decline things that are much, much more expensive and much more hazardous to our financial future. That translate okay, I hope?
Wow, Paul, when you were, oh my gosh, when you had us picture our future selves, I had an emotion that I don't think I've ever felt before, and that was immediate compassion. I mean, I shouldn't say I've never felt compassion before, but compassion for myself. is I just had this flash that, oh my God, that is going to be me someday, and I need to look
And
out
for the
for
rest of your life.
yeah, and I need to be looking out for that future version of me, fiercely looking out for that future version of me. Man, that's a great exercise. Oh,
And so you're right, that compassion for the older you, the person that you got to live with for the rest of your life, whether you funded their lifestyle or not. And I love that idea of compassion for them, being able to think about yourself in their shoes. But I think it does something else for us. Have you ever heard the statistics about even people who had an organ transplant? And in that organ transplant, they have to take this medication. And the compliance with medication that will save their life for an organ transplant they waited for is like less than 50%. All of the medications they have to take. But you take someone else who's responsible for somebody, like a child or a spouse that can't handle the medication themselves, compliance is almost 100% because you're caring for somebody else. So if you put yourself in that mindset, just like you're talking about, Mark, of I've got to take care of that future person I've not met yet, your compliance will be through the roof with whatever tactics are required for your strategy than if you think of it as just you, because we don't take that good care of ourselves. If your dog needs to take medication, does the dog ever miss the medication? No. But I think we've all missed very important, like that, the antibiotic that you took, and then it's like, oh, you're feeling good by day 5, and you forget to take days 6 and 7. But that would never happen with something as simple as a dog, because it's not us, and we will take better care of not us than we take care of ourselves.
so Paul, if somebody took, let's say somebody started in their 20s, like Elan, if she just took 20% of her gross pay and put it into an S&P 500 fund, and that's all she did, do you think we would be surprised at how much she would be worth when she's 65, 70 years old?
I bet you would be. Why don't I'll pick some assumptions, so I won't put you on the spot. So let's say we have somebody who's setting aside 20% and they're making $100,000 a year. So they're going to set aside $20,000 a year. I'm going to give it an 8% rate of return for 40 years. And by the way, I'm also not increasing their income at all over this 40 years. I'm just saying it's $20,000 a year for 40 years. These numbers get much bigger if we also added inflation to the savings amount. As they earn more, they saved a commensurate amount of the additional earnings. Anybody have a rough guess of what that comes to after 40 years? It's, let me go back to my calculator, $5.1 million.
Oh my gosh.
Now, here's the funny thing about that. So $5.1 million would create about $200,000 a year of income. But I'm willing to bet if we did the math and played it all out, the way it usually works, if I get super tight about it, is if we added inflation, everything else, it ends up being just about enough to replace what the after-tax and after-savings consumption amount that the person had if they start in their late 20s and they go for 40 years. There is some then every year longer, and your net worth hasn't kept up with this imaginary line, which is also talked about in the book Stop Acting Rich, then you have to set aside more, or you have to get lucky with returns. The financial services industry loves that people are looking for quote unquote high returns to save them, because that allows them to sell all kinds of products people wouldn't buy otherwise. Because if you're saving enough money, you've actually earned the right to be more conservative than the people that need to play the lotto in the stock market, like buying a stock they hope will be the pandemic stock that goes to the moon, or crypto or commodities. And the reason they're looking for the high return is they actually didn't do the very controllable work of choosing not to spend money and putting it into an asset.